Judge Harold Whitmore leaned back in his chair, amused, watching the young black man stand motionless before him. "You're defending yourself?" the judge said, voice dripping with disbelief. "Well, this should be entertaining." Laughter rippled through the courtroom, clerks, officers, even the prosecutor trying not to grin. Marcus Lyle said nothing. He'd been arrested for obstructing an officer, a charge as vague as it was cruel. His only crime was asking why he was being searched outside a cafe. The officer didn't like the question, and that was enough to turn curiosity into defiance. Now he stood in a courtroom designed to make him small. Whitmore tapped his gavel, smiling. "You know what they say, Mr. Lyle, a man who represents himself has a fool for a client." The words hung there. Cruel, condescending, final. But Marcus didn't flinch. He looked at the judge for exactly 1 second, then lowered his eyes again. Marcus's silence seemed to irritate him more than any argument could have. The judge's smile sharpened. "You do understand the charges, don't you? Obstruction of an officer, failure to comply, resisting a lawful order." Marcus nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. Because I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself by pretending you know the law." The courtroom chuckled again. Outside the tall windows, morning light fell in strict lines, dividing shadow from brightness. Inside, Marcus stood at that dividing line. The accused and the observer, the man and the symbol. He had spent the last 3 nights studying the law he was accused of violating. He knew every line of the report. Subject refused to answer officer's question. Became argumentative. He could still see the officer's face, red from impatience, and hear the words that followed. "You people think you're smarter than the law." That phrase had stayed with him. Smarter than the law. Now he stood before a man who was the law in this room, at least in title. And once again, the assumption was the same, that silence meant ignorance. Whitmore tapped his gavel lightly, not to restore order but to punctuate his amusement. "Very well. Let's proceed. The State versus Marcus Lyle." The prosecutor rose with confidence born of routine. His voice was smooth, practiced, dripping with condescension disguised as civility. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter. The defendant obstructed an officer during a lawful stop. He refused to comply, escalated the situation, and was arrested. We're seeking a minimal penalty, but accountability nonetheless." He sat down with a satisfied nod, certain of victory before the trial even began. Whitmore turned to Marcus. "Mr. Lyle, would you like to respond?" Marcus looked up, eyes steady but distant, as if measuring the walls, the ceiling, the silence itself. "Not yet, Your Honor." The judge blinked. "Not yet. I'll respond when I've been given the record of the officer's statement. It hasn't been entered." Whitmore frowned slightly, glancing at the clerk. "It's procedural. He doesn't need that right now." "Actually," Marcus said quietly, "under Section 14.3, a defendant has the right to review all evidentiary documents prior to cross-examination." The room shifted. A few heads turned. The prosecutor's pen stopped moving. Whitmore's smile returned, but it was thinner now. "Well, someone's been reading. But we're not at cross-examination, are we?" "We're at fairness, Your Honor." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. The courtroom went still for a beat, one of those brief silences that says everything. Whitmore cleared his throat. "Proceed without delay," he ordered. "We're not turning this into a law seminar." Marcus nodded once, accepting the command. He knew better than to argue. The game was older than him, older than his parents, older than fairness itself. You didn't win by shouting. You won by waiting. He listened as the officer took the stand, recounting the story in that sterile tone officers used when facts became fiction through repetition. Marcus watched, memorizing every word, every inconsistency, every tiny betrayal of truth. The defendant was asked multiple times to provide identification, the officer said. He refused and questioned my authority. Marcus noted the phrasing. Question my authority. That was the heart of it. That was the sin. When it was his turn to cross-examine, Whitmore sighed audibly as though indulging a child. Go ahead, Mr. Lyle. Let's hear your brilliant questions. Marcus approached the stand slowly. His hands were steady. His voice, when he spoke, was almost too calm. "Officer Reese, you said I questioned your authority. Can you tell the court exactly what I asked you? You said, 'Why are you searching me?' And is that against the law?" The officer hesitated. "It was obstructive." "Is asking a question obstructive?" The prosecutor objected. "Argumentative." "Sustained," the judge said quickly. "Move on." Marcus nodded and took a step back. He knew he'd drawn enough. When the questioning ended, Whitmore leaned forward. "You're doing your best, Mr. Lyle, but this isn't a classroom debate. The court runs on rules, not feelings." "I understand," Marcus said. "Good. Then maybe you'll save us all some time and accept responsibility. A small fine, community service, think of it as a lesson in respect." The word respect lingered like smoke. Marcus said nothing. His silence returned, that unyielding stillness that had first annoyed the judge. Whitmore sighed. "Very well. We'll reconvene tomorrow for closing remarks. Maybe you'll find your voice by then." He banged the gavel once, more satisfied than he should have been. As the courtroom emptied, the prosecutor joked with the bailiff about law students who think they're geniuses. Laughter again, casual, dismissive. Marcus walked out quietly, carrying his rain-creased pages. He didn't look angry. He looked focused, as if he'd just memorized the architecture of the room, the distance between the judge's bench and the defense table, the way power echoed in the marble walls. Because he knew something they didn't, silence is not surrender. It's study. Tomorrow would not be the same. Marcus leaves the courthouse alone, humiliated but not broken. The judge thinks the trial is nearly over. Marcus knows it hasn't even begun. When a man walks out of a courthouse and the crowd parts for him instead of laughing, something fundamental has shifted. That was the sight outside Municipal Court Building 2 on Monday morning. Reporters waited again, but this time the questions had changed. They no longer asked why Marcus was representing himself. They asked how he was winning. The story had spread overnight. Self-represented defendant silences judge. Man quotes law word for word. Courtroom turns quiet. In an era where clips moved faster than facts, that single moment, Marcus quoting statute from memory, had already gone viral. Someone in the gallery had recorded it. 3 million views in 48 hours. The footage showed no anger, no theatrics. Just precision. That was what made people share it. But inside the courthouse, the reaction wasn't admiration, it was fear. Judge Whitmore sat in his office, rewatching the same clip on his computer, face expressionless. It was the first time in his career that a proceeding under his control had leaked and become national news. The comments were brutal. This judge's arrogance is exactly why people lose faith in the system. He laughed at a man who knew the law better than him. Whitmore leaned back, exhaling through his nose. He knew the law well enough to understand how fragile perception was. Judges lived by two things, authority and silence. Marcus had cracked both. Meanwhile, Marcus was at the city library, his real courtroom. He sat at a wooden desk surrounded by stacks of open books. Civil code manuals, procedural handbooks, case summaries. A librarian walked by and asked if he needed help. "No," Marcus said softly. "I just need time." He spent 10 hours cross-referencing one phrase, unlawful detention. The more he read, the clearer it became. His entire arrest had been a procedural failure. The officers had broken their own department rules, and the prosecution's case relied on that false arrest. But the real revelation came later, buried in a footnote of a civil rights case from 1998. It cited judicial misconduct through pretrial commentary. That meant, if a judge mocked or prejudged a defendant publicly, the trial could be declared compromised. Marcus closed the book and whispered, "Got you." He wasn't planning to humiliate the judge. He was going to make the record do it for him. By Wednesday, tension in the courthouse had curdled into rumor. Clerks whispered in hallways, officers avoided eye contact. People sensed something unusual. The man who was supposed to be powerless had learned the rules better than the ones enforcing them. When court resumed, the gallery was standing room only. Whitmore entered to a low buzz of murmurs. He tried to command order, but his voice had lost its natural gravity. The power dynamic had shifted, invisibly but completely. "Mr. Lyle," he said carefully, "I trust you've prepared your statement?" "Yes, Your Honor." Marcus walked to the stand, placed his papers down, and looked up directly. "I'd like to submit a motion, Your Honor, for judicial review." The room went still. Whitmore frowned. "On what grounds?" "Bias in pretrial commentary. Specifically, the public mockery of a defendant's silence." Whitmore blinked. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. "Do you have evidence?" "Yes, sir. The court transcript, and a viral video viewed by 3 million people. Both showing your words." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Whitmore's gavel slammed once, twice. "That video was unauthorized. It will not be considered." "Maybe not by you," Marcus said calmly, "but it already has been considered by the public you serve." The clerk's pen froze mid-note. Even Hammond, the prosecutor, looked rattled. Whitmore tried to recover. "You are dangerously close to contempt, Mr. Lyle." "I'm already in contempt," Marcus replied. "Contempt is what happens when truth meets pride." The judge's hand trembled slightly before setting the gavel down. After adjournment, Hammond approached Marcus in the corridor. "You're making enemies, Lyle." "Only among men who mistake power for wisdom," Marcus said. Hammond stared. "Do you have any idea how far this could go?" "Far enough," Marcus said. "I'm not after a win. I'm after a correction." That night, Marcus sat in his small apartment surrounded by printed case files. The light from his desk lamp cast a single hard line across the room. He wrote a new brief, a motion for review to the State Judicial Council, including a transcript of the judge's laughter and comments. Every line was factual. No emotion. No commentary. The kind of writing that doesn't shout. It cuts. He sealed the envelope, addressed it, and dropped it into the courthouse nightbox. The next morning, the story made national headlines. Pro se defendant files bias complaint against sitting judge. The words hit the city like a quiet explosion. Inside the courthouse, Whitmore's staff tried to act normal, but everyone knew an investigation could follow. The Judicial Council rarely reviewed local judges, but when they did, reputations burned. Whitmore didn't sleep that night. He stared at his ceiling, remembering every word he'd said in that first session. The joke, the smirk, the mock laughter. He'd thought it harmless. Now it sounded like evidence. By Friday, something extraordinary happened. The prosecutor approached the bench with a motion of his own, motion to dismiss. "Your Honor," Hammond said, "given the procedural irregularities and growing media scrutiny, the state withdraws charges against Mr. Lyle." Whitmore froze. It was the ultimate reversal, the system saving itself by conceding defeat. He had no choice. "Motion granted," he said quietly. "Case dismissed." Marcus didn't smile. Didn't gloat. He simply gathered his papers, nodded once, and walked out. No applause. No words. Just the sound of quiet footsteps echoing through a building that had forgotten how silence felt. The case is over, but Marcus's complaint remains under review. The judge's career hangs in balance, and whispers begin that his downfall isn't legal, it's moral. Marcus, meanwhile, begins receiving letters from law schools and advocacy groups who saw what he did. The world thinks it's over. Marcus knows it's just beginning. 3 weeks passed. The courtroom had moved on to new defendants, new motions, new names. But Judge Whitmore had not. The Judicial Review Board had officially opened an inquiry. A letter sealed with the state's crest now sat on his desk, a document colder than any verdict he'd ever delivered. It wasn't the kind of letter a judge could ignore. The inquiry's purpose was clear: to determine whether the Honorable Judge Raymond Whitmore displayed prejudicial behavior and violated Canon 3 of judicial conduct. The same system he'd once ruled now demanded an explanation from him. Whitmore tried to keep working, but whispers followed him through every corridor. He noticed how clerks stopped talking when he entered, how bailiffs' eyes shifted down. He'd become what he once pitied, a man waiting for judgment. And somewhere out there, the man who'd started it all, Marcus Lyle, was silent again. But this time, his silence wasn't submission, it was consequence. Marcus had returned to normal life, or as close to it as a man who'd unmasked a judge could manage. He worked evenings at a repair shop. The owner, a quiet older man named Darius, treated him differently now, not out of pity, but respect. "You didn't yell, didn't fight dirty," Darius said one night, handing him a wrench. "You just used their own book against them. That's rare." Marcus smiled faintly. "They don't expect people like me to read the book." "They don't expect people like you to understand it," Darius replied. "That's why it hurt." Marcus nodded, tightening a bolt. Then let it hurt. Weeks turned into months. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived at Marcus's apartment, unmarked, official, heavy with meaning. He opened it carefully. Inside, Notice of Determination, State Judicial Review Board. Findings: evidence substantiates bias and prejudicial commentary. Recommendation: suspension pending further investigation. Marcus exhaled slowly. Not a smile, not satisfaction, just closure. He folded the letter and placed it beside the others: transcripts, case notes, newspaper clippings. His record wasn't of defeat, but documentation, a story the system had tried to erase, preserved line by line. He didn't post it online, didn't brag, didn't even tell Darius. He understood something deeper: revenge that needs to be seen isn't justice, it's performance. True justice lives in silence. Meanwhile, Whitmore's suspension became public. Reporters replayed the same clip of him laughing in court. No commentary, no dramatic editing, just his smirk, his words, and the quiet that followed when Marcus quoted the law. That silence now defined his legacy. He resigned before the council could rule. The official statement cited personal reasons. Everyone knew the truth: arrogance had cost him the one thing pride cannot rebuild: credibility. Months later, at a university auditorium, Marcus stood on stage, not as a defendant, but as a guest lecturer. The topic: civic literacy and the power of knowing your rights. He wore the same gray shirt, the same calm voice. "People ask me what justice feels like," he said to the audience. "It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like clarity." He paused, letting the words settle. "They laughed when I stayed silent. But silence isn't ignorance, it's strategy. You don't fight arrogance by shouting louder. You fight it by understanding what it doesn't expect you to know." A student in the front row raised her hand. "So you think knowledge is revenge?" Marcus smiled gently. "No. Knowledge is balance. Revenge fades, balance lasts." After the lecture, an old man approached him in the hallway, a retired attorney. "You handled that case better than most trained lawyers," he said. "You ever think of taking the bar exam?" Marcus laughed softly. "No, sir. I think I'll do more good teaching others how to defend themselves." "You're teaching law?" "No," Marcus said. "I'm teaching courage." That night, as he walked home under the orange haze of streetlights, he passed the courthouse. The same marble steps. The same echoing corridors. Only now, his reflection in the glass didn't look small. It looked steady. He placed his hand against the cool surface and whispered, "This building remembers me." Then he walked away. In every system built on pride, silence is mistaken for weakness until it becomes evidence. Marcus Lyle never shouted, never cursed, never begged. He studied. He waited. And when his moment came, he spoke with precision that even power could not interrupt. The judge lost his seat. The defendant gained his peace. And the lesson remains: arrogance laughs. Intelligence listens. Justice, when it comes, doesn't need to announce itself. It just waits, quietly, until the room goes silent. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe for more real stories that expose arrogance, reveal truth, and remind the world what dignity sounds like. Leave a comment below. Tell us what justice means to you.